Disney Pixar's 2001 film Monsters, Incorporated has one of the most brilliant environmental messages in any film, looking at the environmental debate from multiple perspectives as well as addressing many of the nuances to it, all while still having time left over to still be a fun animated adventure. So it's strange that not that many people talk about its environmental themes. They aren't even brought up in any of the film's sequels. It's not like the film is being subtle about its message. I mean, you have an industry that's presumably responsible for producing most, if not all, of the power in the world. The methods to get that power involves working in a deadly job where you go somewhere foreign, extract the fuel source you need, and leave before you can see the damage done. And for the most part, people don't think about any of the damage done by obtaining this power source. Everyone just knows and accepts that this fuel is necessary. But there's a growing shortage of this power source and a creeping realization that one day it might even run out. And to make matters worse, people start to realize that this source of energy is actually hurting children, the future generation. So it boils down to an ethical dilemma between providing for the needs and livelihoods of the public, or to give all that up so that children can have a brighter future. And the solution that's better for everyone ends up being to go with an alternative energy source that is both completely reliable and more efficient. So yeah, Monsters Inc. is a pretty clear analogy for the oil and gas industry, and the whole film is a journey to realize that alternative energy is better for everyone. Now, I think that the reason that the environmental message in this film isn't talked about as much as other films is because it takes a completely different approach to its message. In most movies with a go green message, the focus is usually on nature itself. Things are good with nature and bad without nature. Simple and straightforward. And just from Monster Inc.'s setting, we can tell it's breaking this model. This movie takes place in a fully developed city that isn't ugly, polluted, nor questionably dystopian. It just looks like an actual city that people would live in. And this already sets up the problems that the characters will have to face in the environmental message of the film. The message isn't as easy as don't cut down the trees or remember to recycle plastic. The movie shows us that a power company like Monsters Incorporated has a lot of responsibilities it needs to juggle, like the economy, the needs of the public, and most recently, the children who are impacted by collecting screams for power. And I think this movie has a hidden brilliance to it. So I want to go in depth and talk about Monster Inc.'s genius environmental message. Mike and Sully's friendship is one of the main focuses of the film, and there's a good reason for that. Their friendship represents the economy. Sully and Mike respectively embody supply and demand. We see several instances where Sully does favors for Mike, getting reservations to a nice restaurant for Mike's date, lending Mike deodorant, and offering to file Mike's paperwork when he forgets to do it. Mike and Sully's roles also translate to their broader roles in Monsters Inc. Sully really believes in the good the company does and is always thinking about what he can give to the company and the community it serves. Mike, on the contrary, is more focused on what he can get out of the company, mostly fame, glory, and recognition, which, funny enough, are also things he gets mostly from Sully's talent as a scarer. This film's environmental message is focused around companies, and how to juggle those responsibilities as a company with the responsibilities of a growing environmental concern. And as the film goes on, watching Mike and Sully's friendship dynamic change is a good gauge for how dealing with the environmental issues affects the company economically. The film starts with Mike and Sully's friendship in complete balance. Sully provides and Mike consumes. There's a bit of a rocky moment when Sully doesn't let Mike drive his car to work because there's a lower supply of power, but this is a minor issue that doesn't hurt their friendship. But, like many beautiful relationships, the real problems begin when we throw a child into the equation. Like I mentioned earlier, the children in this film represent, children, the future generation that's negatively affected by climate change. Yeah, scaring children might not horribly affect every child out there, many will go on to live normal lives, but there's definitely going to be a lot of children out there who will have trauma and need therapy from having monsters come into the room to terrify them. We're shown that Monsters Inc. is a company that fills a need and does a lot of good, but when you stop and think about its effects, it also has the potential to give a lot of children new problems that they'll have to deal with in the future. The children in this film also double as a parallel to nature itself. Be it screams or laughter, all the power the monsters can use seems to only come from children, just like how all the power we humans can use comes from nature. So every environmental issue in this movie is translated to the children getting hurt in some way. This isn't a movie about saving the trees, it's about saving the children. And quick side note, I know that the monsters falsely thinking that children are toxic is entirely a plot convenience and isn't supposed to have any deeper meaning, but there is a lot of real-world misinformation that leads people to justify the continued use of fossil fuels, like the ex-president of the United States saying windmills cause cancer, how people blamed windmills freezing for the Texas-wide power outage in early 2021, despite the fact that fossil fuel plants also froze, hence the power outage, or how people think solar panels will drain all the sunlight and make us run out of sun. All false, but these are reasons some people use to justify fossil fuels over other power sources. The monsters in the movie have probably never tried to be friendly to children or make them laugh because everyone thinks kids are dangerous, and making yourself approachable just puts you in danger. Again, I know this is an unintentional parallel, but I still think it's interesting and, well, sadly relevant. Now we're introduced to Boo, our child ambassador, the child who represents all children in the film. As soon as Sully finds Boo, his priorities shift. He immediately forgets to do the paperwork he offered to do for Mike, and Mike later faces the consequences for it. And for as seriously as Sully took the power shortage at the start of the film, he actually doesn't do any work while he's at the company with Boo. And this introduces a new conflict to the film. The concern people have about how going green affects the economy. Mike, the embodiment of economic demand, becomes increasingly frustrated with Sully taking care of Boo, because that means Sully is providing less for him and their friendship. And while this might come off as selfish in the movie, let's put Mike's struggle into a different perspective. Let's say your electric company calls you up and tells you there is now a strict limit on how much electricity you can use in a day. This is all part of a new green initiative from the city, and if you hit that limit, your power will be cut off for the rest of the day. Everything from your refrigerator to the air conditioner to the lights will not work anymore. Now, this is an extreme example that will never happen, but it's the general idea of why some people are actually against environmental efforts. People want the economy to grow, and there's a concern that too many restrictions that conserve nature will keep the economy from growing and lead to a lower production of goods and services. At this point, we have to make a huge push to recover from climate change. But the truth is, people just won't want to do anything about it if they feel like it means sacrificing something. And this is how Mike feels in the movie. He's ironically frustrated by Sully wanting to go green. Him and Sully used to be in sync. Mike was comfortable. Things were good. And he feels like all that was unfairly taken away from him because of Boo. It's not that Mike doesn't care about the kid, he just feels abandoned and alone. Mike even ends up losing everything he ever cared about. Not from his own decisions, but because of Sully's, the producer's decisions to take care of Boo. And while the movie does make it clear that Sully taking care of Boo is absolutely the right thing to do, it also shows us that it's not the solution. After Sully's scare demonstration, Boo is mortified of the warm, fuzzy monster she's loved throughout the whole film. This is probably the first time Sully has thought about the damage that scare collecting does to human children. If things were to stay the way they are, millions of children like Boo will get hurt by both the company and himself. On the other hand, Sully works at Monsters Inc. He lives in the middle of a large city, and he knows firsthand that power is a necessity. Monsters Inc. has done so much good to everyone he's ever met. Are the lifestyles of monsters worth giving up for the human children? Most other movies with environmental messages would not dare show this perspective or bring up this sort of dilemma. Because of course the child/environment should be chosen. It needs to be obviously the right answer. So the choice shouldn't be that hard. But this movie has a strong enough understanding of the environmental issue to say, yes, it is the right thing to do, but it's not as easy as other movies make it seem. I think if the movie had stopped here, Sully would have simply quit Monsters Inc. because there really is no right answer to him. But that is not the end of the story. Because this movie shows us another layer of the environmental issue. It's not a matter of things staying as bad as they are. It's about how they're going to get much, much worse. Now we're at the point where we really need to talk about the villains and their dastardly plan. The villains in Monsters Inc. are perfect for this film and its message. Waternoose is meant to represent the head of an oil, gas, or coal company. Now, I cannot stress enough how easy it is to portray someone in that position as evil, greedy, and having no consideration for people or the environment. And while I'm not saying those things aren't true, the film does go out of its way to show us Waternoose isn't quite like that. The economy is symbolically brought up in the film, but Waternoose himself never mentions money or profits. And while he talks a lot about preserving the company that's been in his family for generations, he seems to want that because he understands the necessity of providing power to monsters. There's a growing power shortage, and no way to keep up with demand. Everything Waternoose does in this movie, both good and bad, is what he truly thinks the right thing to do is in order to provide that necessity to the monster world. And because Waternoose isn't just a big bad businessman or set up to be a straw man for the sake of the environmental message, the viewer is able to understand Waternoose. You can look at why he does what he does and even get an idea of the other side of the environmental debate from him. There are people who support the oil company over green initiatives, and the reasons why people think that way are usually never addressed in movies because you just gotta go green. But those are still important viewpoints that need to be addressed, because they are very real points that people have. And the fact that there's a whole character that embodies those points without being distractingly evil only strengthens the go green message at the end of the movie. Randall, on the other hand, is the embodiment of greed. Everything he does is out of self-interest and to get as much glory as he can. He's a brilliant inventor and would probably be best suited in the company as a door manufacturer or technician. But he becomes a scarer because that job has the most glory to it, compared to the technicians that get almost no glory. So yes, there is a narratively significant reason why these technicians are so dorky. Randall even later alludes to how he doesn't really care about the scarer job position, and he gives up scaring for engineering when he thinks that could get him more glory, and perhaps even more. Even though Waternoose seems to mean well and does what he thinks is right, he's not going to be around forever, and wants to leave the company in hands that will make it succeed as much as possible. And while this is getting more into speculation, I genuinely think Waternoose is setting Randall up as the next head of the company. It's something that works out both from what we see in the movie and for the themes of the film. Companies are under a constant economic pressure to grow. Even the top companies in the world are under this pressure since growth is the only way to get investors to put more money into the company. So the people who end up in charge of large corporate companies are the ones who are able to maximize profits the most. Randall is greed, and he's the one willing to push the boundaries of what's allowed to get what he wants, which he can get by making the company thrive. And even though Waternoose isn't particularly fond of Randall or his methods, we also see that Waternoose is ready to do anything it takes to make the company survive. And this survival is something Waternoose can ensure by trusting the company in the hands of this greedy individual. It doesn't matter if the reasons to collect screams or extract oil started off pure-heartedly. Ultimately, due to corporate structure, it most likely ends up being greed that continues the process and pushes it to dangerous extremes. In Monsters, Inc., that extreme is the scare extractor, a parallel to real-life fracking. I won't go into detail on what fracking is. I'd recommend the TED video about it if you're interested. But for our purposes, all we need to know is that fracking is an extreme way to extract fossil fuels from the hard-to-reach places in the Earth. But it also releases more harmful greenhouse gases, increases the likelihood of earthquakes, and risks contaminating drinking water with highly toxic chemicals. It's a way to meet demand for fuel in a time when traditional methods of extraction aren't enough anymore, but at the cost of doing a lot more damage in the process. That's exactly the role the scream extractor fills in this movie. Scaring children in their home is admittedly bad, but that's nothing compared to kidnapping the children, bringing them to an entirely new world, strapping them to a machine, extracting from them until they can't scream anymore, and actually I don't know what they plan to do with the children after that. I mean, Waternoose didn't want Boo to be brought home since she's seen too much, and are those cages in the basement? Okay, geez. Anyways, the movie reveals to us that the real question isn't if monsters' lifestyles are worth it to scare children. The real question is revealed to be, where do we decide to draw the line? Like Waternoose says, scaring isn't enough anymore. It's enough of a reason for him to justify kidnapping, and it's enough of a reason for the real-life monsters in the oil and gas industry to justify methods like fracking. Demand for power is only going to keep increasing, and soon, the scream extractor itself might become obsolete, and there will need to be something even more extreme to keep up with demand. At what point do we finally stop and say, it's not worth it? For Sully, it's when he realizes Boo is in danger of being hooked up to the scream extractor. His inner conflict suddenly becomes very clear. He needs to save Boo. And I just want to point out, Sully opposes the use of the scream extractor and wants Boo to get home safely. But he doesn't explicitly oppose scream collection itself. The company later gets shut down because Waternoose gets arrested for kidnapping, not because Sully wanted the company to go down. I think Sully's still unsure about what to do since power is still a necessity, and all he knows is that taking it to this extreme is wrong. Just wanted to clear up that this movie is at no point saying that we should give up all modern conveniences for the sake of the environment. In fact, this movie has the opposite kind of environmental message. Monsters, Inc. takes a different approach and says, you know what, that's not at all how things are going to get better. Even though you have a lot of individuals like Sully who go out of their way to conserve power, that doesn't really do anything. There's still a power shortage, and the same number of kids are going to get scared every day. It honestly would have been no different if Mike had just driven his car to work instead of walking. And that's why the responsibility to take care of the environment falls on the corporations. Consumers can only consume responsibly when they're supplied responsibly. Hence why Monsters, Inc. is both the name and focus of the film. It's the focal point with enough power and influence to do either a lot of good or a lot of bad. And the final solution of the film doesn't happen when the company is about to get shut down. It happens when Sully reworks the company to harness laughter from children instead of screams. It's sustainable, it provides more power, and it doesn't hurt children in the process. Kind of like how solar power has the potential to produce more energy than fossil fuels. Of course, the company's not going to get that way on its own. If everything was left alone, the villains would have won. Their way of doing things is shown to be the natural progression of the company to take. Things only started to get better when Sully, a producer within the company, wanted to make a positive difference and decided to do something about it. But as soon as he leaves Mike to save Boo, he's basically doomed. Sully is trying to make a difference that the established power in the company doesn't want. Sully starts to fail until Mike comes to help him. Sully and Mike's friendship represents the economy, and the way I read this scene is that these types of positive changes can only realistically happen in a company when the consumers are there to support the producers who are trying to do good. And by working together, the economy is used as a tool to help make that positive change. So while the movie says that companies are the ones responsible for being environmentally conscious, it's up to us, the consumers as well, to support those positive changes when they come up. And that's the most realistic and impactful way that Monsters, Inc. says that we can save the planet. That's been my analysis of Monster Inc.'s environmental themes. Here's 2 videos you might like. Scream at the subscribe button, make the like button laugh, and I'll see you next time. Bye.